Welcome back, everyone, to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you turn to these stories as a soothing escape, a gentle bridge into rest. So before you drift off tonight, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always incredible to see how far this sleepy little community stretches across the globe. If you haven't already, be sure to tap that subscribe button so you never miss one of our nightly crime stories. And if tonight's tale resonates with you, consider giving this video a thumbs up. It truly helps more than you know. Now, let the soft rhythm of rain set the mood as we open the pages of a haunting tale, one that begins quietly, like the first drops on a windowpane, then spirals into a series of chilling events etched into the annals of true crime. So, get comfortable. Let the rain carry your thoughts. And let's drift gently into the mystery. Story 1. This is the chilling case of Lori Vallow Daybell, an Idaho mom who killed her kids and claimed during her Arizona trial that her family's tragedy was not a crime. This is a story of family, faith, and the choices that bind or break us. It is a story of love, loss, and the enduring search for answers in the face of unimaginable circumstances. The year 2019 started quietly for Lori Vallow Daybell. To the outside world, hers was the picture of ordinary suburban life, a mother devoted to her family, her children brimming with youthful energy, and her days punctuated by routines familiar to so many. Lori had 3 children, Tylee Ryan, her spirited teenage daughter on the brink of adulthood, Joshua Jackson, known as JJ, an adorable and affectionate 7-year-old who filled the home with boundless curiosity, and her eldest, Colby, already forging his way in the world as a young adult. Alongside them was Chad Daybell, her husband and partner in what appeared to be a life built on shared spiritual convictions and commitment. Neighbors, friends, and acquaintances saw Lori as someone who carried herself with an air of confidence. She attended church, engaged with her community, and balanced the day-to-day challenges of raising a family. Her youngest son, JJ, who had special needs, received her care and attention. Her eldest, Colby, would later describe her as a fiercely loving mother, someone who could brighten any room. There was nothing in those early days to suggest that their story would take a turn, nothing to foreshadow that her family's life would unravel in ways unimaginable. And yet, life has a way of complicating simple narratives. Details of Lori's personal journey began to emerge, pieces of her past, beliefs that shaped her worldview, and a series of decisions that would soon thrust her and her family into the spotlight. She had married Chad Daybell, an author who wrote about apocalyptic visions and the end times, believing they were called by a higher power to fulfill their destiny. Their shared faith took center stage in their lives, becoming more than a guiding principle. It became an anchor, pulling them into something far larger than themselves. But faith, while deeply personal, can intertwine with other forces. And as time marched forward, questions began to surface. It started small, unnoticed by many, a pattern just out of view, too faint to stir concern. Those who knew Lori began to see subtle changes, but there was little reason to dwell on them. After all, the world seemed, on its surface, intact. Days passed, weeks followed, and Lori's life appeared unchanged. She cared for her children. She navigated her marriage with Chad. She lived her life as one might expect. It was only later that the ripples of this story would grow. Pieces would fall into place, revealing connections no one had imagined. And as the world began to pull those pieces together, Lori Vallow Daybell's name became synonymous with tragedy, leaving behind a path of unanswered questions and unresolved pain. To understand Lori Vallow Daybell's story, we must begin long before the headlines, in the quieter chapters of her life. Lori was born in 1973 in Rialto, California. Her early years appeared unremarkable, marked by the same milestones that so many of us experience: school, friendships, family gatherings. As one of 5 siblings, Lori grew up in a household that valued faith, structure, and community. Religion, in particular, played a significant role in her upbringing, shaping her worldview and planting the seeds of devotion that would define much of her adult life. Lori married her high school sweetheart at a young age, but as is often the case, early marriages don't always endure. By her mid-20s, Lori had entered a second marriage, this time to William LaJoya, with whom she had her eldest child, Colby Ryan. Though this union, too, would eventually dissolve, it's said that Lori's devotion to Colby was unwavering. Friends and acquaintances described her as a protective and loving mother, someone who seemed to find her purpose in raising her children. Her third marriage, to Joseph Ryan, brought Tylee into the world. Tylee Ryan was a lively, bright girl who would grow up to share a close bond with her older brother, Colby. Yet, beneath the surface of this marriage, cracks began to form. The relationship was marked by difficulties and, according to court documents, allegations of abuse. Lori would later speak of these years as a challenging period, one that left lasting scars on her and her family. In 2006, Lori married Charles Vallow, her fourth husband. Charles, a successful businessman, provided a stable and comfortable life for Lori and her children. Together, they adopted J.J. Vallow, the biological grandson of Charles's sister, Kay Woodcock. J.J. was a joyful and affectionate boy, diagnosed with autism at a young age. Lori appeared deeply committed to his care, learning to navigate the complexities of raising a child with special needs. By all outward appearances, the Vallow family seemed harmonious, a picture of resilience and unity despite the challenges of blended family life. It was during her marriage to Charles that Lori's spiritual journey took a distinctive turn. A lifelong member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Lori began to explore more fringe interpretations of her faith. She immersed herself in literature and teachings that focused on apocalyptic themes, the end times, the second coming of Christ, and the roles individuals might play in this divine plan. These beliefs, though unconventional, were not entirely uncommon in some religious circles. But for Lori, they became all-consuming. In 2018, Lori crossed paths with Chad Daybell, an author known for his books on near-death experiences and doomsday prophecies. Chad, a devoted follower of the same faith, had built a small but loyal following through his writings and speeches. He claimed to have had visions of the afterlife, encounters with angels, and insights into the world's impending transformation. For Lori, meeting Chad was a revelation, a moment that seemed to confirm her own spiritual awakening. The two quickly formed a deep connection, one built on shared beliefs and a mutual sense of destiny. Chad told Lori that they had been married in previous lives and that their union was preordained by divine will. Together, they believed they were chosen to prepare for the second coming of Christ, tasked with gathering the righteous and standing against the forces of darkness. For Lori, who had long sought purpose and meaning, this partnership must have felt like the culmination of a lifetime of faith. However, these beliefs did not exist in isolation. They began to influence Lori's relationships, decisions, and priorities. Friends and family members noticed changes in her demeanor. Charles Vallow, once a devoted husband, grew increasingly concerned about Lori's behavior. In 2019, he filed for divorce, citing her obsession with doomsday prophecies and claiming that she had threatened his life. Charles's fears were dismissed by some as exaggeration, but his words would later take on a chilling significance. By the time Lori and Chad's relationship became public knowledge, their lives had shifted dramatically. Chad had lost his wife, Tammy Daybell, under circumstances that would later draw scrutiny. Lori had relocated to Idaho, leaving behind the remnants of her previous life. Together, they began to build a new narrative, one that placed them at the center of a divine mission. But as their beliefs deepened, so too did the questions surrounding their actions. What had happened to JJ and Tylee, the children Lori once seemed so devoted to? And how had Faith become entwined with such profound tragedy? Lori Vallow Daybell's life before the events unfolded offers a glimpse into the forces that shaped her choices, the relationships that defined her, and the beliefs that would ultimately lead to a reckoning. As we continue, we'll trace the timeline of events that followed, piecing together the fragments of a story that continues to haunt those it touched. By the fall of 2019, unsettling questions about the whereabouts of Lori Vallow Daybell's children had begun to emerge. Family members, once close to Lori, found themselves increasingly concerned. JJ, the 7-year-old boy with boundless energy, and Tylee, the vibrant teenager, had seemingly disappeared from view. Though Lori offered assurances that her children were safe and cared for, those words began to ring hollow as weeks turned into months without any trace of them. In late November, Kay and Larry Woodcock, JJ's grandparents, took action. They reached out to law enforcement in Rexburg, Idaho, where Lori and Chad had recently relocated. Kay, who had spoken to JJ often, was distraught over the sudden lack of communication. Her instincts told her something was wrong, something that required immediate attention. Authorities in Rexburg began investigating, contacting Lori to inquire about her children's whereabouts. On November 26, 2019, police visited Lori's home to conduct a welfare check. Lori was calm and confident, insisting that JJ was staying with friends in Arizona. Chad Daybell, also present during the visit, seemed detached from the matter, claiming he hardly knew Lori's children. Suspicious of the pair's vague explanations, officers decided to follow up. But within hours, Lori and Chad had fled their home, leaving behind unanswered questions and growing concerns. As the investigation deepened, authorities uncovered troubling details. Friends and family reported unusual behavior from Lori in the months leading up to JJ and Tylee's disappearance. Lori had expressed beliefs that her children were possessed, and no longer themselves, a chilling assertion that left those close to her stunned and bewildered. Meanwhile, Chad's apocalyptic teachings seemed to provide a framework for these claims, intertwining faith with fear in ways that would later come under intense scrutiny. In early 2020, the search for JJ and Tylee gained national attention. Lori and Chad, now married, had relocated to Hawaii, seemingly unbothered by the mounting questions surrounding them. In February, Lori was arrested on charges of child desertion, providing law enforcement with a critical opportunity to press her for answers. Yet Lori remained resolute in her silence, refusing to disclose any information about her children's whereabouts. Her attorney argued that she was being unfairly targeted, but the lack of evidence to support her claims left investigators undeterred. Months passed with little progress. Friends of Lori and Chad offered conflicting accounts, adding to the confusion surrounding the case. Some described Lori as a loving mother who had fallen under Chad's influence. Others painted a darker picture, suggesting that Lori's beliefs had consumed her, leading her to make decisions that defied reason and compassion. Amid this uncertainty, investigators continued to piece together fragments of the story, searching for the truth in a sea of contradictions. The breakthrough came on June 9, 2020, when authorities executed a search warrant on Chad Daybell's property in Salem, Idaho. The day began quietly, with officers methodically combing the grounds for any signs of the missing children. As the hours passed, their efforts focused on a particular area of the backyard, where anomalies in the soil suggested recent disturbances. With measured precision, they began to dig, uncovering what would soon become a scene of heartbreak. Beneath the earth lay the remains of 2 children, JJ and Tylee. The discovery confirmed the worst fears of those who had held on to hope for their safe return. JJ's remains were found wrapped in plastic, buried in a shallow grave. Tylee's remains, severely burned, were found nearby, leaving investigators to piece together the events that led to this devastating outcome. The property, once a quiet rural home, became the site of a tragic reckoning. For the community, the discovery marked a turning point. The search was over, but the questions were far from answered. How had two innocent lives come to such an end? What role had Lori and Chad played in this tragedy? And how had their beliefs shaped the decisions that led to this moment? The answers would unfold over the coming months, as legal proceedings and testimony shed light on the choices and circumstances that forever altered the lives of JJ and Tylee. This is not just a story of crime, it is a story of humanity, faith, and the devastating consequences of unchecked beliefs. The tragedy of JJ and Tylee is one that will not be forgotten, and their memory serves as a reminder of the fragility and importance of family bonds. By April 2025, Lori Vallow Daybell once again found herself at the center of a courtroom, this time in Arizona, facing charges related to the death of her fourth husband, Charles Vallow. The trial, which had been long anticipated, drew significant public attention, not only because of Lori's prior convictions in Idaho but also due to the complex web of relationships, beliefs, and events that had led to this moment. For many, this trial represented another chapter in a story that had already captivated and horrified the nation. The courtroom was tense as Lori, representing herself, delivered her opening statement. Dressed in a modest outfit, she appeared composed, her voice steady as she addressed the jury. She began by recounting her version of events, painting a picture of a family struggling with internal conflicts but far removed from the sinister motives alleged by the prosecution. A family tragedy is not a crime, she told the jury, her tone measured and deliberate. It's a tragedy. Lori's defense centered on the claim that Charles's death was a case of self-defense, not premeditated murder. She described the events of July 11, 2019, the day Charles was fatally shot by her brother, Alex Cox, during a confrontation at her home in Chandler, Arizona. According to Lori, the incident began when Charles arrived at the house to pick up their son, JJ, for school. She alleged that an argument ensued after Charles demanded his cell phone, which Lori had taken earlier. The situation escalated when Tylee, then 16, emerged from her room with a baseball bat, attempting to protect her mother. Lori recounted how the struggle over the bat led to Alex intervening, ultimately resulting in Charles being shot. She emphasized that Alex's actions were in defense of her and Tylee, who she claimed were in imminent danger. Self-defense is not a crime, she reiterated, her voice firm yet calm. It's a fundamental right. The prosecution, however, presented a starkly different narrative. In their opening statement, they argued that Charles's death was not an unfortunate accident but a calculated act motivated by financial gain and Lori's increasingly extreme religious beliefs. They pointed to the $1 million life insurance policy on Charles, which Lori had attempted to claim shortly after his death. Although Charles had reportedly removed Lori as the beneficiary months earlier, the prosecution suggested that Lori's expectation of receiving the payout played a significant role in her actions. Prosecutors also delved into Lori's relationship with Chad Daybell, highlighting how their shared doomsday beliefs had influenced her decisions. They alleged that Lori and Chad viewed Charles as an obstacle to their divine mission, labeling him as possessed by an evil spirit they referred to as Ned. This belief, they argued, provided Lori with a justification for removing Charles from her life, aligning with her and Chad's apocalyptic worldview. Throughout the trial, the prosecution presented a series of text messages, emails, and recorded phone calls that they claimed demonstrated Lori's intent. In one message, Lori allegedly referred to Charles as a zombie, a term she and Chad used to describe individuals they believed were under the control of dark forces. The prosecution argued that this language reflected Lori's dehumanization of Charles, making it easier for her to rationalize his death. Witness testimony further complicated Lori's defense. Friends and family members described her as a devoted mother who had undergone a dramatic transformation after meeting Chad. They spoke of her growing obsession with doomsday prophecies and her belief that she and Chad were chosen to lead the 144,000 in preparation for Christ's second coming. While some witnesses expressed sympathy for Lori, suggesting that she had been manipulated by Chad, others painted a more critical picture, portraying her as a willing participant in a dangerous ideology. As the trial progressed, the jury was presented with evidence that challenged Lori's narrative. Forensic analysis of the crime scene raised questions about the sequence of events she described. The prosecution argued that the positioning of Charles's body and the trajectory of the gunshots were inconsistent with Lori's claim of self-defense. They also pointed to Lori's behavior in the aftermath of the shooting, including her decision to take JJ to Burger King and purchase flip-flops before returning home to speak with police. These actions, they suggested, indicated a lack of remorse and a focus on maintaining appearances rather than addressing the gravity of the situation. Lori's decision to represent herself added another layer of complexity to the trial. While she demonstrated a clear understanding of the legal process, her cross-examinations of witnesses often veered into tangential discussions about her beliefs and experiences. At times, her arguments seemed more focused on defending her faith than addressing the charges against her. This approach, while consistent with her previous statements, left some observers questioning whether she fully grasped the seriousness of her situation. The trial also revisited the broader context of Lori's actions, including her prior convictions in Idaho for the murders of JJ and Tylee. While the Arizona case focused specifically on Charles's death, the shadow of her past loomed large, influencing public perception and adding weight to the prosecution's arguments. For many, the trial was not just about determining Lori's guilt or innocence but about seeking justice for the lives lost and the families forever changed. As the trial neared its conclusion, both sides made their final appeals to the jury. Lori, in her closing statement, maintained her innocence, urging the jury to see her as a mother caught in a tragic series of events rather than a cold-blooded killer. "I loved my family," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted any of this to happen." The prosecution, however, urged the jury to consider the evidence, arguing that Lori's actions were driven by a dangerous combination of greed and fanaticism. During opening statements, prosecutors argued that Lori wanted Charles dead for his insurance to marry her fifth husband. She would get $1 million life insurance policy from Charles Vallow, prosecutor Trina Kay told the jury. She would get Social Security for herself and their son, JJ, as a child of a dead spouse. As the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell unfolded, the courtroom became a stage not only for legal arguments but also for deeper questions about the human psyche, the power of belief, and the consequences of radical ideologies. Lori's mindset, shaped by years of religious devotion and her relationship with Chad Daybell, became a focal point for both the prosecution and the public. How could a mother, once described as loving and devoted, come to justify actions that led to such profound tragedy? To understand Lori's mindset, one must first examine the beliefs that guided her decisions. Raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Lori's faith was a cornerstone of her identity. She attended church regularly, participated in community activities, and instilled religious values in her children. But over time, her beliefs began to diverge from mainstream teachings, influenced by literature, podcasts, and conferences that explored apocalyptic themes. These ideas, while not uncommon in certain circles, took on a new intensity when Lori met Chad Daybell. Chad, a self-published author and self-proclaimed prophet, introduced Lori to a worldview that blended religious doctrine with his own visions of the end times. He claimed to have had near-death experiences that granted him access to the spirit world, allowing him to receive divine messages and foresee future events. Together, Lori and Chad developed a belief system centered on the idea that they were chosen to lead the 144,000, a select group destined to survive the apocalypse and usher in Christ's second coming. This belief elevated their sense of purpose, placing them at the center of a cosmic battle between good and evil. Within this framework, Lori and Chad categorized individuals as light or dark, based on their perceived spiritual alignment. Those deemed dark were believed to be under the influence of evil forces, or zombies, as they referred to them. This terminology, while seemingly fantastical, had real-world implications. Lori began to view certain people in her life, her ex-husband Charles, her children JJ and Tylee, and even Chad's late wife Tammy, as obstacles to their divine mission. By labeling them as dark, Lori and Chad rationalized actions that would otherwise be unthinkable. Psychologists and religious scholars have offered various theories to explain Lori's mindset. Some suggest that her beliefs were a coping mechanism, providing a sense of control and certainty in an unpredictable world. Others argue that Lori's relationship with Chad played a significant role, with Chad acting as a charismatic figure who reinforced and amplified her convictions. The concept of groupthink has also been explored, highlighting how shared beliefs within a close-knit circle can lead to distorted perceptions and decision-making. Public reactions to Lori's case have been deeply divided. For some, Lori is seen as a victim, someone who was manipulated by Chad and swept up in a dangerous ideology. Her friends and family have described her as a kind and caring person who underwent a dramatic transformation after meeting Chad. They recall her as a devoted mother who loved her children and would never intentionally harm them. This perspective raises questions about the influence of charismatic leaders and the vulnerability of individuals seeking meaning and purpose. Others, however, view Lori as a willing participant in the events that unfolded. They argue that her actions were not solely the result of manipulation but a conscious choice to embrace beliefs that justified harm. This perspective has led to broader discussions about accountability and the role of personal agency in cases involving radical ideologies. How do we balance empathy for those who fall prey to manipulation with the need for justice for those who are harmed? The implications of Lori's case extend beyond the courtroom, touching on societal and cultural issues. It has sparked debates about the dangers of religious extremism and the fine line between faith and fanaticism. Religious scholars have pointed out that while Lori and Chad's beliefs were rooted in their faith, they represented a radical departure from mainstream teachings. This divergence highlights the potential for individuals to reinterpret doctrine in ways that align with their personal agendas, often with devastating consequences. The case has also shed light on the role of social media and online communities in spreading and reinforcing radical beliefs. Lori and Chad's ideas were not developed in isolation, they were influenced by a network of like-minded individuals who shared their apocalyptic worldview. Conferences, podcasts, and online forums provided a platform for these ideas to flourish, creating an echo chamber that validated and amplified their convictions. This phenomenon raises questions about the responsibility of platforms and communities in preventing the spread of harmful ideologies. As the trial concluded, the public continued to grapple with the broader implications of Lori's story. It is a case that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the human capacity for belief and the ways in which those beliefs can shape our actions. It challenges us to consider the balance between faith and reason, the influence of charismatic figures, and the importance of accountability in the face of tragedy. Ultimately, Lori Vallow Daybell's case is not just a story of crime, it is a story of humanity. It is a reminder of the complexities of the human mind, the power of belief, and the devastating consequences that can arise when those beliefs go unchecked. As we reflect on this case, we are left with questions that may never be fully answered, but that continue to resonate in the lives of those it has touched. As we come to the end of this story, we are left with a case that will forever echo in the halls of history, a narrative woven with faith, family, and tragedy. The story of Lori Vallow Daybell is one that defies simple explanations, challenging us to confront the complexities of belief and human behavior. Tonight, we've traced the threads of this tale, from Lori's life before the events unfolded, to the tragedy of JJ and Tylee, and the trial that sought to provide answers in the face of profound loss. It began with Lori as a mother and a believer, someone navigating the familiar rhythms of family life while holding on to deeply rooted convictions. Her meeting with Chad Daybell marked a turning point, one that would intertwine faith and prophecy in ways that led to devastating consequences. Together, their shared belief in a divine mission brought decisions that altered lives, not only their own but those of the children Lori once appeared to cherish. Through witness testimonies, forensic evidence, and Lori's own words, the courtroom became a space for examining not only the facts but the broader implications of her story. It asked us to consider how beliefs can lead individuals down paths they may never have imagined, and how love can sometimes be overshadowed by actions that betray its very essence. Story 2. This is the story of Brittany Hopkins, her life, her family, and the series of events that led to her heartbreaking fate. A story of love, loss, and unanswered questions. Stay with me as I recount every detail of this case, a story that continues to echo in the hearts of all who knew her. On a cold February morning in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, the hum of daily life carried on as usual. The streets bustled with people heading to work, errands being run, and the quiet routine of the city slowly unfolding under the pale light of dawn. Among the ordinary noise of the day, in an unassuming corner of a parking lot, something stopped everyone in their tracks, a discovery so haunting, it would ripple across the community in ways no one could have imagined. Brittany Hopkins, a 29-year-old expectant mother and mother of 3, was found lifeless. She lay tucked within the confines of a shopping cart, covered haphazardly by a comforter stained with a story that no one dared to yet read. There was no note, no immediate explanation, just a cold silence that seemed to speak of an unimaginable loss. Her family had been searching, desperate for answers after she vanished without a trace. Now, they were left grappling with heartbreak, confusion, and the first threads of a case that would unearth more than anyone could have foreseen. What happened to Brittany Hopkins? How did her journey end in such a tragic and unexpected way? And who could possibly hold the answers to the questions her family and an entire community now face? Before her name became known across news headlines and whispered among investigators, Brittany Hopkins was, at her core, a loving mother. At just 29 years old, she had already been through a lifetime of ups and downs that most would consider overwhelming, yet she persevered with a quiet strength. Brittany was the mother of 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all of them young and vibrant, full of life. Her children were the focal point of her world. She would often say to friends and family that her greatest accomplishment wasn't found in her work or her personal achievements, it was in the laughter of her children, the smiles she could bring to their faces, and the unconditional love they gave her in return. Those closest to her described her as fiercely devoted, willing to sacrifice anything to ensure her kids were cared for, loved, and supported. But life hadn't always been kind to Brittany. She had faced challenges many would find insurmountable. Financial struggles were a constant shadow in her life, one that grew heavier after she separated from her partner. With 3 children to raise and another on the way, the pressure was immense. Yet Brittany refused to let her circumstances define her. She took on multiple jobs, juggling her responsibilities as both a provider and a caregiver with remarkable resilience. Those around her marveled at her ability to make the most of what little she had, always putting her children first. Family members recall her fears growing in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. There were moments when Brittany seemed more withdrawn, quieter than usual. She had confided to her sister that she felt uneasy about certain people in her life, though she never revealed specifics. Her intuition told her something wasn't right, though she couldn't put her finger on it. She had expressed concerns about trusting too easily, especially as she struggled to navigate her personal life while caring for her children. Brittany was no stranger to adversity, but she had a light within her that seemed unyielding, even during the darkest days. She found joy in small moments, reading bedtime stories to her children, organizing playdates, and celebrating milestones, no matter how modest they were. Her family described her as resourceful and creative, able to turn an ordinary day into something memorable for her kids, even if it meant simply baking cookies together or watching their favorite movies. Her passion extended beyond motherhood. Brittany had dreams of building a better life for herself and her family. She wanted to pursue a career in healthcare, inspired by her desire to help others. She often spoke about going back to school, yearning for a brighter future where her children could thrive without worry. Those dreams now remain as echoes of the hope she carried within her, a hope that tragically never came to fruition. As the days stretched on after her disappearance, her family grew increasingly desperate. Brittany was not the type to vanish without a word. They described her as responsible and attentive, always checking in on her children even during long work hours. When she failed to return home, alarms went off in her family's minds. Something was deeply wrong. What had caused her to break from her usual patterns? Where could she have gone? And, most haunting of all, what might have happened to her? Her fears, her struggles, and her quiet determination as a mother paint a picture of a woman who was far more than the tragic circumstances that later surrounded her name. Brittany Hopkins was a fighter, a dreamer, and a nurturer. In life, she gave everything she had to ensure her children felt loved and cared for. In death, her story continues to resonate, a stark reminder of the challenges and vulnerabilities faced by those trying to make their way against immense odds. It was a quiet morning in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, on February 28, 2025. The kind of morning where the world feels still, as if holding its breath. The parking lot of a local strip mall was just beginning to stir with activity, early risers grabbing coffee, store employees preparing for the day ahead. Among the mundane rhythm of life, a discovery was made that would shatter the calm and leave an indelible mark on the community. In the far corner of the lot, near a dumpster, a shopping cart stood out. It wasn't unusual to see abandoned carts scattered around, but this one was different. Draped over it was a comforter, stained and crumpled in a way that drew immediate attention. A passerby, curious and concerned, approached the cart. What they found beneath the comforter would haunt them forever. Inside the cart lay the lifeless body of Brittany Hopkins, young mother of 3 and pregnant with her 4th child. Her face was bruised, her body battered, and the scene told a story of violence that no one was prepared to confront. The comforter, soaked in blood, seemed to hold the weight of the tragedy, a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded. The passerby, shaken and barely able to process what they had seen, called 911. Within minutes, law enforcement arrived, their flashing lights cutting through the morning haze. Officers cordoned off the area, their faces grim as they assessed the scene. The shopping cart, once an ordinary object, now stood as a chilling centerpiece of a crime that would grip the town. News of the discovery spread quickly. Residents gathered near the parking lot, their whispers filled with disbelief and fear. Brittany was well known in the community, a devoted mother who had faced her share of struggles but always seemed to persevere. The idea that someone could harm her, especially in such a brutal manner, was incomprehensible. Investigators began their work, meticulously documenting the scene. The shopping cart was examined for fingerprints, the comforter collected as evidence. Surveillance cameras from nearby stores were reviewed, hoping to capture any clues about who had left the cart there and when. The initial findings were sparse, leaving more questions than answers. As the investigation unfolded, the community's reaction was one of collective grief and outrage. Candlelight vigils were held in Brittany's honor, her friends and family speaking of her kindness, her resilience, and the love she had for her children. Strangers who had never met her felt compelled to pay their respects, moved by the tragedy of her story. Law enforcement faced immense pressure to solve the case. The brutality of the crime, coupled with Brittany's status as a pregnant mother, made it a priority for investigators. Leads were followed, witnesses interviewed, and evidence analyzed. The shopping cart, once a mundane object, became a symbol of the search for justice, a reminder of the life that had been lost and the questions that remained unanswered. The discovery of Brittany Hopkins' body marked the beginning of a case that would challenge investigators, devastate her family, and leave a community searching for answers. It was a moment that turned an ordinary day into one of profound sorrow, a day that would be remembered not for its quiet beginnings but for the tragedy that unfolded in its midst. As the investigation into Brittany Hopkins' tragic death unfolded, law enforcement began piecing together the events leading up to that fateful February morning. The process was meticulous, driven by the determination to uncover the truth and bring justice to Brittany and her family. Witness accounts became the first threads in the tapestry of evidence. Investigators interviewed neighbors, friends, and anyone who might have seen or spoken to Brittany in the days before her disappearance. Among these accounts, one name surfaced repeatedly: Donnie Donnell White. White was someone Brittany had interacted with in the weeks leading up to her death. Witnesses described seeing the two together on several occasions, though the nature of their relationship remained unclear. Some recalled Brittany appearing uneasy during these interactions, though she never openly expressed concern. The focus on White intensified when investigators obtained surveillance footage from the area near the parking lot where Brittany's body was discovered. The footage, though grainy, showed a figure pushing a shopping cart in the early hours of February 28. The cart appeared to be covered with a large object, later identified as the comforter that concealed Brittany's body. While the figure's identity couldn't be confirmed from the footage alone, it provided a crucial lead. With this evidence in hand, law enforcement turned their attention to White's residence. A search warrant was obtained, and what they found inside his apartment would become a pivotal moment in the investigation. The scene was unsettling. Blood spatter was discovered on the walls and floor, suggesting a violent struggle had taken place. Bleach stains were also present, indicating an attempt to clean up the evidence. Among the items collected was a hammer, which bore traces of hair and blood. Forensic analysis would later confirm that the blood matched Brittany's. The discovery of these items painted a chilling picture, but investigators remained methodical in their approach. Every piece of evidence was carefully catalogued and analyzed, ensuring that the case against White would hold up in court. Forensic experts worked tirelessly to connect the dots, examining the blood patterns, the DNA evidence, and the timeline established by the surveillance footage. As the investigation progressed, additional witnesses came forward, providing further insight into White's behavior. Some described him as reclusive and unpredictable, while others mentioned seeing him in the vicinity of the parking lot on the night of February 27. These accounts, combined with the physical evidence, began to form a compelling narrative. Despite the mounting evidence, investigators knew they needed to proceed with caution. The case was complex, and every detail had to be scrutinized to ensure that justice would be served. The community watched closely as law enforcement worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery, their efforts driven by the memory of Brittany and the desire to bring closure to her grieving family. The investigation into Brittany Hopkins' death was a testament to the dedication and perseverance of those seeking the truth. It was a process marked by careful analysis, collaboration, and an unwavering commitment to justice. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, the story of what happened to Brittany began to emerge, a story that would ultimately lead to the arrest of Donnie Donnell White and the hope for answers in the wake of an unimaginable tragedy. The arrest of Donnie Donnell White marked a turning point in the investigation into Brittany Hopkins' tragic death. On March 19, 2025, White was apprehended in Nevada, hundreds of miles away from Cedar Rapids, where the crime had unfolded. The arrest came after weeks of relentless investigative work, during which law enforcement meticulously pieced together the evidence that pointed to White as the prime suspect. White was charged with first-degree murder and non-consensual termination of pregnancy, a charge that underscored the gravity of the crime. The legal proceedings that followed were closely watched by the community, Brittany's family, and the media. The courtroom became a space where the details of the case were laid bare, each piece of evidence adding to the narrative of what had transpired. Prosecutors presented a compelling case against White, drawing on the physical evidence found in his apartment, the surveillance footage, and witness testimonies. The hammer, stained with blood and hair, became a central piece of evidence, its presence in White's apartment raising questions about his involvement. Forensic experts testified about the blood spatter patterns and the bleach stains, explaining how they indicated an attempt to clean up after the crime. Witnesses who had interacted with White in the days leading up to Brittany's death described his behavior as erratic and unsettling. Some recalled seeing him near the parking lot where Brittany's body was discovered, while others mentioned overhearing conversations that hinted at tension between him and Brittany. These accounts, combined with the physical evidence, painted a picture of a man who had been at the center of the events leading to Brittany's death. Throughout the trial, Brittany's family remained a constant presence in the courtroom, their faces etched with grief and determination. They listened as prosecutors recounted the details of the case, their emotions raw as they heard about the evidence that had been collected. Their presence served as a reminder of the human cost of the crime, a cost that extended beyond Brittany to her children, her siblings, and her parents. The defense, meanwhile, sought to cast doubt on the prosecution's case, questioning the reliability of the evidence and the motives of the witnesses. They argued that the surveillance footage was inconclusive and that the physical evidence could not definitively link White to the crime. Despite their efforts, the weight of the evidence presented by the prosecution proved difficult to counter. As the trial progressed, the community's response remained one of solidarity with Brittany's family. Vigils were held outside the courthouse, with residents lighting candles and sharing memories of Brittany. Her story had touched the lives of many, and the trial became a moment of collective mourning and reflection. The legal proceedings were not just about seeking justice for Brittany, they were also about ensuring that her story was heard and remembered. The courtroom became a space where her life was honored, her struggles acknowledged, and her legacy preserved. It was a space where the community came together to support her family and to demand accountability for the crime that had taken her life. The arrest and trial of Donnie Donnell White were a testament to the determination of law enforcement, the resilience of Brittany's family, and the strength of a community united in grief. As the case drew to a close, the hope for justice remained steadfast, a hope that Brittany's story would not be forgotten and that her memory would continue to inspire those who knew her and those who came to know her through her story. Brittany Hopkins' tragic death left an indelible impact on her family, friends, and the community she called home. In the days, weeks, and months that followed the discovery of her body, those who loved her struggled to come to terms with the loss, searching for solace in memories and the enduring love they felt for her. Brittany's children were perhaps the most profoundly affected by her absence. Too young to fully grasp the gravity of what had happened, they were suddenly deprived of the steady, nurturing presence that had been the cornerstone of their lives. Relatives and close friends stepped in to provide care and support, yet the void left by Brittany was one that no one could truly fill. Family members recalled how much she adored her children, how she would play games with them, read them stories, and comfort them through life's little bumps and bruises. That love now lived on in their memories, forming a beacon of hope for the future despite the pain of her loss. For Brittany's extended family, the tragedy was a reminder of the fragility of life and the resilience of love. Her parents and siblings spoke openly about the heartbreak they felt, but also about the legacy Brittany left behind, a legacy of strength, kindness, and unwavering commitment to her family. They vowed to keep her memory alive, ensuring her children would grow up hearing stories of their mother's love and courage. Brittany's sister, in particular, became an advocate for victims of violence, using her platform to raise awareness and support others enduring similar hardships. The broader community of Cedar Rapids, too, felt the ripples of Brittany's passing. It was a town where neighbors knew one another, where stories like hers struck a deep chord. Vigils were held across the city, with residents coming together to honor her life and mourn her loss. These gatherings became moments of unity, where candles were lit, prayers were offered, and tears were shed in Brittany's memory. People who had never met her were moved to show their support, touched by her story and inspired by the resilience of her family. Brittany's death also sparked important conversations about safety, community vigilance, and the need for justice. Local organizations organized outreach programs and workshops aimed at supporting families in crisis, hoping to prevent future tragedies. These efforts became a testament to Brittany's enduring influence, a legacy that continued to inspire change even in the face of sorrow. As the case against Donnie Donnell White progressed, the search for justice became a focal point for Brittany's loved ones and the community at large. Justice, they believed, was not just about punishment, it was about recognition. Recognition of Brittany's life, her struggles, and her intrinsic worth as a mother, a daughter, and a friend. It was about ensuring that her story would not be forgotten, that her life would be honored, and that her death would serve as a call to action against violence and injustice. In reflecting on Brittany's life and the impact of her death, there emerged a quiet but powerful sense of hope. Hope that her children would grow up surrounded by love and support. Hope that her story would inspire others to seek help, to speak out, to protect one another. Hope that in remembering Brittany, a brighter future could be built, one where tragedies like hers would no longer occur. As we conclude Brittany's story, let us hold space for her memory. A moment of silence speaks louder than words ever could, reminding us of the fragility and preciousness of life. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Imagine the light Brittany brought to those around her, a light that cannot be extinguished by tragedy. Let us honor her legacy and the love she gave so freely. And as the soft rain continues, let us carry with us a message of remembrance and justice. Brittany's story does not end here. It lives on in the hearts and minds of those who knew her and those who have come to know her through this retelling. May her memory remain a source of strength, a testament to resilience, and a call to never forget the lives behind the headlines. Story 3. Woman allegedly killed man in hit and run, then posted about him on Facebook while cops looked for suspect. This is a story of loss. Of a town grappling with truth and deception. Of a father remembered not only in sorrow but in the haunting actions of another. As the investigation unfolded, Palmer would find itself at the center of questions too complicated to answer. And one woman's social media posts would leave everyone wondering why. The streets of Palmer, Tennessee, lie still beneath a canopy of muted morning light. A small town, where time seems to idle and stories weave themselves into the quiet rhythm of its people. Trees line the roads like sentinels, their roots deep in the earth that holds generations of memories. Houses rest calmly, their exteriors giving no hint of the lives within, lives filled with hope, hardship, and secrets. It was on these very streets, so ordinary and unassuming, that Bobby Dan Green's life came to an abrupt, tragic end. A man whose history was known to some but overlooked by many. His footsteps on these roads had been deliberate, etched with purpose, even if that purpose had been tangled in the struggles of his past. Homelessness, addiction, an estranged connection to his only daughter, Clara, all parts of a life marked by resilience, yet shadowed by circumstance. This town, like so many others, has its rituals. Locals speak of kindness that binds the community, but also the whispers that circulate in quiet corners. On the evening of Bobby's death, those whispers began to stir. No witnesses had come forward, no cameras had captured the fatal hit-and-run that stole his life. All that remained was a sense of loss that lingered in the air, and questions that seemed far from any answers. But what followed next was a twist that no one saw coming. A digital ripple in the town's otherwise analog existence. A series of posts on Facebook, shared as the community mourned, added a strange, unsettling layer to the tragedy. The posts bore words of tribute to Bobby, written not by his loved ones, but by the very person police would soon name as their suspect. Bobby Dan Green was a man shaped by circumstances that many could never fully understand. Born and raised in Palmer, Tennessee, he spent his childhood exploring the winding roads and sprawling woods of the town. As a boy, Bobby's spirit was vibrant, known for his mischievous grin and a knack for fixing things. Yet, the warmth of those early years faded as life took a more challenging turn. By his late teens, Bobby found himself caught in the grip of hardship. With a family struggling to make ends meet, opportunities were scarce, and choices grew increasingly limited. Though he tried to carve a path for himself, setbacks came in waves, first in the form of financial troubles, then through the pressures that pushed him toward addiction. What began as an escape from the weight of his reality soon became the chains that held him back. Through the years, Bobby's life became more fragmented. His struggle with addiction strained relationships, and he found himself homeless, navigating the streets with little more than determination to survive. The people of Palmer were familiar with his figure, often seen walking alone, carrying an old, worn backpack that he considered his most precious possession. It was in that backpack that Bobby kept mementos of his daughter, Clara, reminders of what he held closest to his heart despite the distance between them. Clara Green was the light in Bobby's world. Even as his struggles took him away from being the father he wanted to be, his love for her never faltered. Clara, now in her 20s, remembered the fleeting moments of joy they shared during her childhood, a bike ride through the park, afternoons fixing broken toys, and stories her father told with an unshakable enthusiasm. These memories were the threads that connected them, even as Clara's life moved forward. Clara herself was no stranger to hardship. Watching her father grapple with addiction had left an indelible mark on her. Yet, she carried herself with grace, fueled by a determination to honor Bobby's humanity. Despite the challenges of their relationship, Clara never allowed her love for her father to waver. She had spent years trying to help him find stability, offering support whenever she could and holding on to hope that he might one day find peace. When Bobby passed away, Clara was left with more questions than answers. She chose to channel her grief into action, creating a movement to raise awareness about addiction and homelessness in her community. In her eyes, her father's story was not merely one of tragedy, it was a call for compassion, a reminder that behind every struggle, there is a person deserving of dignity and care. Bobby Dan Green was seen making his way down the side of a road he had walked countless times before. The road itself, flanked by dense trees on one side and weather-worn fences on the other, seemed almost deserted. Bobby's figure, slight and unassuming, was illuminated briefly by the headlights of passing cars, each of which continued on its way without pause. It was an ordinary scene in a small town where routine often went unnoticed, until it didn't. At 7:45 p.m., a car approached the stretch of road Bobby was on. Witness accounts were scarce, but it was later determined that the vehicle, a dark-colored sedan, had been moving at an unusually high speed. The collision happened in an instant, so fast that no one nearby even registered the sound. The sedan struck Bobby with such force that it sent him sprawling several feet from the point of impact. The driver did not stop. No brake lights, no hesitation. The car disappeared into the distance, leaving behind nothing but a silence that felt heavier than before. It wasn't until several minutes later that a passerby, a local resident walking their dog, spotted Bobby lying motionless by the roadside. The resident called emergency services, and the small-town response was swift. An ambulance arrived, but by the time the paramedics assessed the scene, it was too late. Bobby Dan Green had succumbed to his injuries. The road, now cordoned off with police tape, became the setting for the questions that would haunt the town in the weeks to come. The news of Bobby's death spread quickly through Palmer. Though he was not widely known in the town's social circles, his presence had been a familiar one. People recalled seeing him on his walks, carrying that same worn backpack, and sometimes exchanging a quiet nod of acknowledgement. The small community, where personal connections ran deep, felt an unsettling sense of loss. Clara Green's grief became a focal point for many. Her heartfelt posts on social media and her public calls for compassion struck a chord with residents. In a town that rarely saw violent crime, the idea of a hit and run, with no accountability or explanation, created an air of unease. Local businesses began organizing fundraisers to support Clara, while churches held memorial services to honor Bobby's memory. Candles and flowers were placed along the roadside where he had died, a makeshift memorial that grew with each passing day. Conversations in the town's diners and barbershops turned to speculation. Who could have done this? Why would someone flee the scene? As days turned into weeks without an arrest, the community's grief began to intertwine with frustration. People felt compelled to act, but the lack of clear answers left them feeling powerless. For the Palmer Police Department, a hit-and-run of this magnitude was uncharted territory. With no surveillance cameras in the area and no immediate witnesses, the investigation faced significant challenges from the outset. Officers combed through the evidence at the scene, searching for fragments of the vehicle or traces of paint that might offer a clue. Tire marks were documented, though the investigators knew these could only take them so far without additional information. Detectives issued public pleas, urging anyone with information to come forward. Flyers were distributed, and announcements were made during community gatherings. The case drew the attention of local media, which amplified the call for leads, but the results were slow to materialize. For weeks, the investigation felt like it was treading water, until something unexpected broke the monotony. The case took a pivotal turn when detectives received an anonymous tip. A resident had noticed unusual activity on Facebook, specifically posts made by a woman named Haley Lehman. These posts included tributes to Bobby, which might have seemed unremarkable if not for their peculiar tone and timing. The police, intrigued by this lead, began to dig deeper. Their initial review of Haley's social media revealed inconsistencies in her posts. The details she shared appeared to align too closely with elements of the crime that had not been made public. The investigators, already stretched thin, now had a name and a direction. They secured warrants to obtain more information, marking the beginning of a complex and delicate pursuit of truth. As the town of Palmer mourned the loss of Bobby Dan Green, a peculiar series of social media posts began to surface on Facebook. At first, these posts blended into the outpouring of grief from the community. Among the condolences and tributes, one name stood out: Haley Lehman. Her posts, which included expressions of sorrow and shared memories, struck an odd chord, given that her connection to Bobby wasn't widely known. Haley's first post appeared just days after Bobby's death. She shared Clara Green's heartfelt plea for information about the hit-and-run. Beneath Clara's original post, Haley added her own comment: "This is such a tragic loss. My heart goes out to Bobby's family. He was so missed in this town." It was a message that might have seemed benign at first glance, but as investigators later noted, her words carried a familiarity with the victim that raised questions. A few days later, Haley shared another post. This time, it was a personal tribute to Bobby. She wrote about the impact he had on those around him, describing him as a kind soul who deserved better. Strangely, she even mentioned details about his struggles and the emotional weight of his life, details that had not been made public. People in the community began to take notice, wondering how Haley knew so much about Bobby's life and why she was so vocal about her grief. The most unsettling post came nearly 2 weeks after the incident. Haley uploaded a photo of the roadside memorial where Bobby had been struck, captioning it, "I drive past this spot every day, and it breaks my heart. Rest easy, Bobby." It was a hauntingly specific admission, she acknowledged driving by the exact location of the hit and run on a daily basis. The post caught the attention of Clara, who found the gesture strange and unwelcome. Meanwhile, the police, already monitoring Haley's social media activity, saw this as a significant lead. Haley's posts didn't go unnoticed by law enforcement. Investigators, who had been struggling to make progress in the case, began piecing together the timeline of her online activity. The specificity of her posts suggested a level of knowledge about the incident that went beyond mere speculation. It was as though Haley was leaving breadcrumbs, unintentionally or otherwise, for the authorities to follow. Police obtained a warrant to review Haley's private Facebook messages and activity logs. What they discovered added another layer to the mystery. In one private conversation with a friend, Haley expressed her anxiety about the ongoing investigation. She mentioned being unable to sleep and feeling a constant sense of dread. While she didn't explicitly confess, her words pointed to an internal conflict that detectives found hard to ignore. It was a small but crucial piece of evidence that eventually led to Haley's arrest. On a cold morning 3 weeks after Bobby's death, officers arrived at Haley's home with a warrant. They searched her property and found a damaged sedan parked in her garage. The vehicle matched the description of the car involved in the hit and run, and forensic analysis revealed traces of paint and other evidence consistent with the scene of the crime. When confronted, Haley's initial reaction was one of denial. She insisted that she had nothing to do with the incident and claimed her posts were merely an expression of community grief. However, as the evidence mounted, her story began to unravel. Police later released a statement confirming that Haley had been charged with vehicular manslaughter and leaving the scene of an accident. As the story unfolded, questions lingered, not just about the crime itself, but about the motivations behind Haley's actions. Why had she chosen to post about Bobby so publicly? Was it a misguided attempt to alleviate her guilt, or an unconscious cry for help? Could there have been a part of her that wanted to be caught, to bring closure to a tragedy she could no longer keep hidden? These are the questions that resonate long after the events in Palmer. They serve as a reminder of the complexity of human behavior and the moral weight of choices made in the aftermath of a tragedy. Following Haley Lehman's arrest, the legal process began swiftly but methodically. She was charged with vehicular manslaughter and leaving the scene of an accident, both of which carried significant penalties under Tennessee law. During her initial court appearance, Haley appeared subdued, avoiding eye contact as the charges were read aloud. Her attorney, appointed shortly after her arrest, entered a plea of not guilty on her behalf, emphasizing that the evidence against her, while compelling, was circumstantial in some respects. The prosecution, however, presented a narrative that painted Haley's actions in a damning light. They emphasized the deliberate nature of her decision to flee the scene and the subsequent actions, her social media posts, that appeared to mock the very tragedy she had caused. Investigators noted that Haley had made no attempt to report the accident or render aid, which compounded the gravity of her offense. As the case progressed, the small courtroom became a focal point for the community. Local residents attended hearings, many of them seated beside Clara Green, whose quiet presence served as a reminder of the tragedy's human impact. Clara, though reserved, was resolute in her determination to see justice served. She remained composed, even as the defense attempted to shift blame onto external factors, suggesting Haley's actions were driven by panic rather than malice. The trial, which was set to take place several months after Haley's arrest, promised to be a defining moment for the town. Legal experts debated whether Haley's online activity, particularly her confessional posts, would play a pivotal role in the prosecution's case. Meanwhile, the media's attention on the trial grew, bringing an unprecedented spotlight to the otherwise quiet town of Palmer. Amid the legal turmoil, Clara Green emerged as a voice of compassion and resilience. Despite her personal grief, she took it upon herself to advocate for awareness and change. In interviews with local reporters and heartfelt posts shared online, Clara painted a portrait of her father that went beyond the headlines. She spoke about Bobby's struggles with addiction and homelessness, not as defining features of his life, but as battles he faced with courage, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Clara's message was one of understanding. "My father was more than his circumstances," she said during a vigil held in Bobby's memory. "He was a man who loved deeply, who tried so hard to find his way back, and who deserved kindness just as much as anyone else." Her words resonated with many, shedding light on the humanity often overlooked in stories of those who live on society's margins. In the weeks following Bobby's death, Clara launched a campaign to raise awareness about the systemic challenges faced by individuals like her father. She partnered with local organizations to host workshops on homelessness, addiction recovery, and community support. Clara also shared her father's story at schools and churches, emphasizing the importance of empathy and action. Her efforts began to shift the narrative surrounding Bobby, transforming his memory into a catalyst for change. The community of Palmer, moved by Clara's strength and dedication, rallied to support her. A GoFundMe campaign, initially set up to cover Bobby's funeral expenses, quickly surpassed its goal. Contributions poured in not only from local residents but also from people across the state and beyond who had learned about the story through news coverage. The additional funds were used to establish a small scholarship in Bobby's name, dedicated to supporting young people pursuing careers in social work or addiction recovery services. Local businesses joined the effort as well, organizing events to raise money and awareness for Clara's initiatives. A popular coffee shop hosted an art auction featuring pieces created by local artists, with proceeds donated to programs aiding the homeless. Schools held charity drives, collecting supplies for shelters in the area. The roadside memorial where Bobby had been struck became a gathering place, its growing collection of candles and flowers a symbol of the community's collective mourning and hope. The tragedy had left an indelible mark on Palmer, but it also brought people together in ways that few could have anticipated. The town's response, though rooted in sorrow, became a testament to the power of unity and compassion. As the story of Bobby Dan Green comes to its close, the small town of Palmer remains marked by a tragedy that touched so many lives. His death, sudden and cruel, was more than a mere accident on an unlit road. It was a moment that exposed the vulnerability of human existence. Bobby's life, filled with struggles and triumphs, was a reminder that beneath every hardship lies a story worth telling, a story deserving of compassion. In the quiet corners of Palmer, the community continues to reflect on the lessons left behind. Bobby's story is not just a cautionary tale about the dangers of reckless behavior, nor solely an example of the importance of accountability in justice. It is, above all, a testament to the fragility of life and the connections that endure even in the face of adversity. His memory lives on in his daughter Clara, who embodies the resilience and hope her father sought but could not always find. The tragedy also sparked a transformation within the town. Bobby's passing reminded people of the weight carried by those who struggle in silence, of the dignity owed to every individual regardless of their circumstances. Through Clara's advocacy, Palmer has become a town more attuned to its collective responsibility, a community with a renewed focus on understanding, helping, and healing. For all the sorrow that has unfolded, Bobby's life underscores a truth that is both sobering and uplifting: every life, no matter its path, holds the power to inspire change. And most importantly, join the conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you take away from this story? How can we all play a part in fostering compassion and understanding? Your voice matters, and together, we can honor Bobby's memory by striving for a world where no one's struggles go unnoticed. As the screen fades to a serene image of a quiet road at sunset, the story leaves you with one final thought: life is precious, delicate, and deeply interconnected. Let's take care of one another while we can. Story 4. The story of Joseph Voigt, the gamer who tragically killed his father and wounded his mother after being told to get a job. Joseph Voigt was no stranger to the comforts of home. At 21 years old, he spent most of his time in the familiar surroundings of his parents' house in Florida. A place where the hum of a game console and the glow of a screen often filled the quiet spaces. To his neighbors, he might have appeared as an ordinary young man, a gamer with a passion for virtual worlds, living in the safety net of his family. His father, Marvin Voigt, was the kind of man people respected. A dedicated worker, a provider, and someone who valued structure and responsibility. Joseph's mother, Susan Voigt, was equally admired, kind-hearted and steadfast, someone who looked after her family with a quiet strength. Together, the Voigts were seen as a typical suburban family, navigating the ups and downs of life like anyone else. They were not the kind of family anyone would associate with tragedy. But appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the surface of ordinary life often lies a complexity that outsiders rarely see. Inside the Voigt household, tensions had begun to grow. Marvin, a father concerned about his son's future, had tried to encourage Joseph to step out from the shelter of his gaming and take responsibility, to find a job and begin to build his life beyond the confines of their home. To Marvin, it was the advice any parent might give. To Joseph, it was something else entirely. On the evening of December 7, 2024, what began as a conversation about responsibility would veer into a confrontation that no one could have predicted. The events that unfolded that night would leave one family member dead, another injured, and an entire community searching for understanding. How could something so devastating happen in a home that, until that moment, seemed unremarkable in its normalcy? This is the story of a son whose passion for gaming turned into an obsession, a father whose well-meaning words struck a dangerous chord, and a mother who found herself caught in the aftermath of a crime that shocked everyone who knew them. Over the next hour, we'll walk through the lives of the Voigt family, the unfolding of that fateful evening, and the chilling aftermath that left more questions than answers. Joseph Voigt was a young man whose life revolved around the digital worlds he created and explored through his gaming. For hours on end, he would sit in front of his console, headphones on, immersed in the sounds of virtual battles and quests. To Joseph, gaming was more than a pastime. It was his escape, his passion, and perhaps even his identity. He had built connections online, forming friendships with fellow gamers who shared his enthusiasm for the virtual realm. But while Joseph thrived in these digital spaces, his real-world relationships were far more complicated. At home, Joseph's parents, Marvin and Susan Voigt, watched their son with growing concern. Marvin, a man who had spent decades working hard to provide for his family, believed in the value of responsibility and independence. He had always hoped that Joseph would follow in his footsteps, finding a career and building a life of his own. Susan, on the other hand, was more nurturing, often acting as a mediator between her husband and son during their disagreements. She understood Joseph's love for gaming but worried about the toll it was taking on his future. The Voigt household, located in a quiet Florida neighborhood, was modest but comfortable. Photos of family vacations and milestones adorned the walls, a testament to the life they had built together. Yet, behind the smiles captured in those images, tension had begun to simmer. Marvin's frustration with Joseph's lack of direction was growing, and their conversations often turned into arguments. Marvin would urge Joseph to find a job, to contribute to the household, and to take steps toward independence. Joseph, however, felt misunderstood, his passion for gaming dismissed as a waste of time. Joseph's relationship with his parents was further strained by his prior legal troubles. He had been arrested for firing a weapon in a residential area and had faced charges of battery. These incidents had left a mark on the family, adding to the stress and uncertainty that already existed. Marvin and Susan had hoped that these brushes with the law would serve as a wake-up call for their son, prompting him to make changes in his life. But instead, Joseph seemed to retreat further into his gaming, using it as a refuge from the pressures of the outside world. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the Voight household continued to build. Marvin's attempts to motivate Joseph often came across as harsh, leaving his son feeling cornered and defensive. Susan tried to maintain peace, but even her gentle approach couldn't bridge the growing divide between father and son. The once harmonious family dynamic was now overshadowed by frustration, disappointment, and a sense of helplessness. On the evening of December 7, 2024, the Voight family's struggles reached a breaking point. What began as a conversation about Joseph's future escalated into a confrontation that would change their lives forever. The details of that night are chilling, a stark reminder of how quickly ordinary conflicts can spiral into tragedy. But to understand the events of that fateful evening, we must first grasp the complexities of the relationships and circumstances that led to it. On that fateful evening in the Voight household, Joseph Voight was in his usual spot, immersed in his gaming setup, headphones on, eyes fixed on the screen. For him, this was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the pressures of the real world. But for his father, Marvin Voight, it was a source of frustration. Marvin had spent the day reflecting on his son's future, his concerns growing with each passing hour. He had tried to talk to Joseph before, urging him to find a job, to take responsibility, to step out of the virtual world and into reality. Tonight, he decided to try again. The conversation began in the living room, a space filled with family memories, photos on the walls, a worn-out couch that had seen countless movie nights. Marvin approached Joseph with the intention of having a serious discussion. His tone was firm but not unkind, a father trying to guide his son toward a better path. Susan Voight, Joseph's mother, was nearby, listening but hesitant to intervene. She had seen these conversations before, and she knew how quickly they could escalate. As Marvin spoke, Joseph's frustration grew. He felt cornered, misunderstood, his passion for gaming dismissed as a waste of time. The argument intensified, voices rising, emotions flaring. Susan stepped in, trying to calm the situation, but her efforts were in vain. What happened next was sudden, shocking, and irreversible. Joseph left the room briefly, and when he returned, he was armed. The details of those moments are chilling. Marvin was shot first, the sound of the gunfire shattering the quiet of the night. He was found later in the driveway, his life ended by a single, devastating act. Susan, in her attempt to protect her husband, became the next victim. She was shot inside the house, her injuries severe but not fatal. The aftermath was chaotic. Susan, despite her injuries, managed to call 911, her voice trembling as she reported the unimaginable. Law enforcement arrived quickly, finding Marvin's lifeless body outside and Susan inside, fighting for her life. The scene was a stark contrast to the suburban tranquility that had defined their neighborhood. Joseph fled the scene, driving away in his car. A "Be on the lookout" notice was issued, and hours later, his vehicle was spotted by the Orlando Police Department. At around 2 a.m., he was apprehended during a traffic stop. In custody, Joseph admitted to the shooting, his confession a mix of anger, regret, and confusion. He told deputies that his father had been "riding his ass" about getting a job, a phrase that underscored the tension that had led to this tragic outcome. Susan was rushed to a nearby hospital, where she received treatment for her injuries. Her survival was a testament to her strength, but the emotional scars of that night would remain forever. Marvin's death left a void in the lives of those who knew him, a man who had tried to guide his son, only to become a victim of his frustration. The Voight family's story is one of heartbreak, a reminder of how quickly ordinary conflicts can escalate into tragedy. It forces us to confront difficult questions about family dynamics, mental health, and the consequences of unchecked emotions. As we continue to explore this case, we'll delve into the investigation, the legal proceedings, and the broader implications of this devastating event. The events of that night set in motion a swift and coordinated response from law enforcement, as the tragedy within the Voigt household unfolded into a full-scale investigation. At approximately 11:20 p.m., a 911 call was placed by Susan Voigt, her voice trembling and strained as she reported the unthinkable. Despite her injuries, Susan managed to convey the critical details. Her son, Joseph Voigt, had shot both her and her husband, Marvin Voigt, before fleeing the scene. The urgency in her voice underscored the gravity of the situation, and first responders were dispatched immediately. When officers from the Bartow Police Department arrived at the Voigt residence, they were met with a scene of devastation. Marvin Voigt was discovered in the driveway, his lifeless body bearing the evidence of a fatal gunshot wound. Inside the home, Susan was found seated on the couch, conscious but gravely injured. She had sustained a gunshot wound to the head, yet she clung to life with remarkable resilience. Emergency medical personnel worked quickly to stabilize her before transporting her to a nearby hospital for further treatment. The crime scene itself was meticulously documented by investigators. The modest suburban home, once a symbol of family life, was now a site of tragedy. Bullet casings were collected, and photographs were taken to preserve the details of the scene. Each piece of evidence would later play a crucial role in piecing together the events of that night. As Susan was rushed to the hospital, law enforcement agencies across the region were alerted to be on the lookout for Joseph Voigt. A description of his vehicle was broadcast, and officers were instructed to approach with caution. The manhunt for Joseph was underway, with the Bartow Police Department receiving assistance from the Polk County Sheriff's Office and other neighboring agencies. Hours later, at approximately 2 a.m., Joseph's vehicle was spotted by officers from the Orlando Police Department on International Drive. A felony traffic stop was conducted, and Joseph was taken into custody without incident. The arrest marked the end of a tense and urgent search, but it was only the beginning of the legal process that would follow. In the days that followed, investigators worked to build their case against Joseph. During his initial interviews with detectives, Joseph admitted to the shootings, his confession providing a chilling account of the events that had transpired. He described the argument with his father, Marvin, and the frustration that had boiled over into violence. His words painted a picture of a young man overwhelmed by emotions he could no longer control. The evidence collected from the crime scene corroborated Joseph's confession. Ballistic analysis linked the recovered firearm to the bullets that had struck Marvin and Susan. Witness statements from neighbors, who reported hearing gunshots and seeing Joseph's vehicle leave the scene, further supported the timeline of events. Investigators also uncovered details about Joseph's prior legal troubles, including arrests for battery and discharging a firearm in a residential area. These incidents provided context for the escalating tensions within the Voigt household. Throughout the investigation and subsequent legal process, visuals such as police reports, courtroom sketches, and photographs of the crime scene provided a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. These images, while difficult to view, served as important tools in documenting the case and ensuring that justice was served. The story of Joseph Voigt's actions on that fateful night is one of heartbreak and loss, a cautionary tale about the consequences of unresolved conflict and unchecked emotions. The legal proceedings surrounding Joseph Voigt's actions on that night marked the culmination of a tragedy that had left a family shattered and a community grappling with the unthinkable. On April 7, 2025, Joseph stood before the court and entered a guilty plea to charges of second-degree murder for the death of his father, Marvin Voigt, and first-degree attempted murder for the attack on his mother, Susan Voigt. This plea agreement, reached after weeks of negotiation, reflected the gravity of his crimes while sparing the family the emotional toll of a lengthy trial. Joseph's guilty plea was accompanied by the dismissal of a charge related to shooting into a building, a concession made as part of the agreement. The court acknowledged the evidence presented by the prosecution, including Joseph's confession, ballistic analysis, and witness statements, all of which painted a clear picture of the events that had unfolded. The sentencing possibilities for Joseph ranged from 26 years to life in prison, a stark reminder of the consequences of his actions. For Susan Voigt, the legal proceedings were both a source of closure and a painful reminder of the night that had forever changed her life. As the sole surviving victim of the crime, Susan faced the daunting task of rebuilding her life while carrying the physical and emotional scars of her injuries. Her testimony during the proceedings highlighted the devastating impact of the tragedy on her family, as well as her hope for justice and healing. The broader implications of this case extend far beyond the courtroom. Joseph's actions have sparked conversations about the role of gaming addiction in shaping behavior and the challenges of navigating family conflict. While gaming itself is not inherently harmful, the case underscores the importance of addressing underlying issues such as isolation, frustration, and mental health struggles. Joseph's obsession with gaming, coupled with his inability to cope with his father's criticism, created a volatile situation that ultimately led to tragedy. The Voigt family's story also serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of communication within families. Marvin's attempts to guide his son, though well-intentioned, were met with resistance and misunderstanding. Susan's efforts to mediate, while admirable, were unable to bridge the growing divide. This case highlights the need for families to foster open and empathetic dialogue, particularly when addressing sensitive topics such as career aspirations and personal passions. As the community reflects on the events of December 7, 2024, there is a collective recognition of the need to prioritize mental health and conflict resolution. Resources such as counseling and support groups can play a crucial role in helping individuals and families navigate challenges and prevent escalation. The tragedy of the Voigt family serves as a reminder that seeking help is not a sign of weakness but a step toward healing and understanding. As we come to the end of this tragic and thought-provoking story, let's take a moment to reflect on the key points that have unfolded. The events of December 7, 2024, were a devastating culmination of tension within the Voigt household, a family that, on the surface, seemed ordinary but was grappling with deeper struggles beneath the surface. Joseph Voigt, a young man consumed by his passion for gaming, found himself at odds with his father, Marvin Voigt, whose well-meaning attempts to guide his son toward responsibility ultimately led to a confrontation that spiraled into violence. Marvin's death and Susan's injuries were not just the result of a single moment of anger but the product of unresolved conflict, miscommunication, and unchecked emotions. The investigation that followed revealed the complexity of the relationships within the family, as well as the broader societal issues surrounding gaming addiction, mental health, and family dynamics. Joseph's guilty plea and the legal proceedings that ensued brought some measure of closure, but the emotional scars left behind will remain with Susan and the community for years to come. This story challenges us to think critically about the importance of communication, empathy, and understanding within families. It serves as a reminder that even the most ordinary households can face extraordinary challenges, and that seeking help, whether through counseling, support groups, or open dialogue, is a vital step in preventing tragedy. Story 5. This is the story of Sonia McKnight, the Pennsylvania judge who shot her ex-boyfriend in the head as he slept. The night was quiet, as if the world had paused to take a breath. In a small Pennsylvania town, the stillness seemed almost sacred, a moment frozen in time. Houses lined the street, their windows aglow with warm light, shielding stories both mundane and extraordinary. Among them, one house in particular harbored the lives of two people whose paths had crossed in ways few could have imagined. Sonia McKnight, a respected judge with a mind as sharp as the gavel she wielded, carried a life filled with accolades, scrutiny, and unrelenting ambition. Michael McCoy, her ex-boyfriend, once held a different kind of presence in her world, one of companionship, of quiet comfort. Their histories intertwined, building a narrative that many would envy, but few truly understood. The hours stretched as the town slipped into its nightly rhythm. Yet, as the clock ticked onward, an event was set into motion, an event that would forever alter the lives of those it touched. Nothing seemed out of place, no signs of disruption marred the calm exterior of the neighborhood. But behind closed doors, the currents of the night carried a weight that could not be seen, only felt. For those who knew them, Sonia and Michael were individuals with their own lives, their own aspirations. Yet on this particular night, something unfolded, something that would be remembered not only in courtrooms and headlines but in the hearts of all who sought to understand what truly transpired. Sonia McKnight's journey to becoming a judge was one marked by perseverance and determination. Born and raised in Pennsylvania, she grew up in a family that valued hard work and ambition. From a young age, she showed a keen interest in justice, fairness, and the intricacies of the law, a passion that would shape her entire life. Her path, however, was not without challenges. As a law student, Sonia excelled academically, earning praise for her sharp mind and her ability to navigate complex legal principles with ease. Yet beneath the surface, she grappled with the pressures that came with ambition. Balancing her studies and personal life often felt like a delicate act, one that left her questioning whether she could achieve all she had dreamed of without sacrificing the relationships and connections that mattered most. Her early career was a testament to her dedication. Sonia began as a defense attorney, working tirelessly on cases that tested her resolve and her belief in the system. She earned a reputation for her meticulous preparation and her unwavering commitment to her clients. Her courtroom demeanor was calm yet commanding. She carried herself with a quiet authority that demanded respect. It wasn't long before she was appointed as a judge, a milestone that solidified her standing as a prominent figure in her community. Sonia's achievements were celebrated far and wide. She was seen as a symbol of integrity and professionalism, someone who had overcome obstacles to achieve greatness. But like anyone, she was human. Beneath the accolades and the formal robes, she was a person with vulnerabilities and desires that extended beyond the courtroom. It was during her time as a judge that she met Michael McCoy, a man whose demeanor was warm and inviting. Michael's presence was a contrast to the often rigid and demanding environment Sonia found herself in. He was easygoing, with a natural charm that made those around him feel at ease. For Sonia, Michael represented something she had been longing for, a sense of companionship and comfort that her professional life couldn't provide. Their relationship began with promise, filled with moments of laughter and mutual understanding. Michael had a way of grounding Sonia, reminding her of the simpler joys in life. They shared dinners that stretched late into the night, walks through Pennsylvania's scenic trails, and conversations that revealed their deepest thoughts. Sonia found herself drawn to his kindness and his ability to bring light into her often serious world. But as time went on, tensions began to emerge. The demands of Sonia's career were relentless, and the expectations placed upon her weighed heavily on their relationship. Michael, though supportive, struggled to find his place in her world, a world that was often consumed by legal battles and the responsibilities of her position. Their dynamic shifted, becoming more strained with each passing month. Subtle cracks appeared in their once harmonious connection. Disagreements over priorities, communication, and the future began to take a toll. Sonia's ambition, which had driven her to success, became a point of contention. Michael admired her determination but felt increasingly sidelined as her focus remained on her career. Sonia, on the other hand, found herself torn between her love for Michael and her commitment to the role she had worked so hard to attain. Though they tried to reconcile their differences, the strain proved difficult to overcome. Their relationship began to unravel, not with dramatic fights or sweeping gestures, but with the quiet erosion of what had once been a strong bond. Moments that were once filled with joy became tinged with sadness, and the distance between them grew, almost imperceptibly, until it was impossible to ignore. The night of February 10, 2024, began like any other in the quiet neighborhood of Saddle Ridge Drive, Dauphin County, Pennsylvania. The air was still, the streets empty, and the faint glow of porch lights illuminated the rows of houses. Inside one of these homes, Michael McCoy had retired to bed, seeking solace in the familiar comfort of his room. The day had been uneventful, and as he drifted into sleep, there was no indication of the events that were about to unfold. Michael had been living alone in the house for several days, or so he thought. His relationship with Sonia McKnight had ended just a week prior, and he had asked her to leave his home. Their parting had been fraught with tension, but Michael believed that the worst was behind him. He had changed the locks, removed her key, and tried to move forward. Yet, unbeknownst to him, Sonia had returned, using a spare key to gain access to the house. The hours ticked by, the house enveloped in silence. Michael lay in his bed, his breathing steady, his mind lost in the depths of sleep. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of a digital clock on the nightstand. It was a scene of tranquility, a moment of peace that would soon be shattered. Yet, peace was not the reality. Unbeknownst to Michael, someone else was there, moving silently through the shadows of the house. Sonia McKnight was present. Her footsteps were deliberate, her actions guided by a resolve that no one but her could understand. She moved through the familiar space, past rooms that had once been shared by the two of them, and approached Michael's bedroom. The seconds ticked by, the quiet stretching to fill the void. Then, in an instant, the silence was broken. A sharp, sudden sound reverberated through the house, a gunshot. The noise was jarring, cutting through the stillness like lightning in a night sky. It was a sound that would be remembered for the devastation it left behind. Michael awoke in confusion and agony. The pain was immediate and excruciating, radiating through his head like fire. For a moment, he couldn't comprehend what had happened. His vision was blurred, his thoughts muddled. All he knew was pain, sharp, unrelenting, and all-consuming. He tried to reach for his face, but his hands trembled, his body weakened by shock. The bullet had entered the right side of Michael's face, just below his eye, before traveling a linear path and exiting on the left side. The trajectory was horrifyingly precise. It left him blinded in one eye and caused extensive damage to surrounding tissues. Blood began to pool, staining the bedding and floor as Michael struggled to process the reality of what had just unfolded. Sonia stood nearby, her presence undeniable. Her demeanor, however, was not one of remorse or panic but of control. In those moments, she attempted to rewrite the narrative, telling Michael that he had shot himself. Her words, though spoken with authority, were a stark contrast to the evidence that would later come to light. Michael, despite his disorientation and pain, rejected her claims. He knew the truth. He had not pulled the trigger. Desperate and injured, Michael fought against the darkness threatening to consume him. He managed to summon the strength to call for help, his voice strained but insistent. The act of dialing emergency services, of speaking through the pain, was a testament to his resilience and will to survive. Paramedics arrived swiftly, their presence a lifeline in the chaos. They worked with precision, stabilizing Michael before rushing him to the hospital for urgent care. As Michael underwent emergency treatment, the wheels of justice began to turn. Law enforcement arrived at the scene to piece together the events of that fateful night. The evidence was stark and incriminating. Gunpowder residue was found on Sonia's hands, a detail that directly contradicted her initial statements. The physical evidence painted a clear picture, one that aligned with Michael's account of the events. Detectives combed through the house, gathering evidence that would later be presented in court. The trajectory of the bullet was analyzed, confirming that it was impossible for Michael to have inflicted the wound upon himself in the manner described by Sonia. Witnesses, including neighbors and acquaintances, were interviewed, providing additional context and insight into the dynamics of Michael and Sonia's relationship. As the investigation progressed, Sonia's narrative began to unravel. Her claims of innocence were met with skepticism, her demeanor under scrutiny. The calm, composed judge who had once commanded respect in the courtroom was now at the center of a case that shocked her community. She was arrested and charged, the weight of the evidence against her impossible to ignore. The arrest marked the beginning of a legal battle that would captivate the public. Questions lingered, about motive, intent, and the events that led to that single moment of violence. Sonia's fall from grace was a stark reminder of the complexities of human behavior, the thin line between control and chaos. The events of that night were a collision of past and present, of relationships frayed and choices made. For Michael McCoy, survival was not just a physical battle but an emotional one, a fight to reclaim his life and his truth. For Sonia McKnight, the night marked the end of a carefully constructed persona, a descent into a reality that could not be denied. The crime, though contained within the walls of one house, echoed far beyond, leaving a legacy of questions that might never be fully answered. The trial of Sonia McKnight began on a crisp morning in April 2025, drawing widespread attention from the community and beyond. The Dauphin County Courthouse, a building steeped in history, became the stage for a legal battle that would unravel the events of February 10, 2024. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense yet composed, the weight of the case palpable in every corner. Michael McCoy, the victim of the shooting, took the stand early in the proceedings. His testimony was a pivotal moment, offering the jury a first-hand account of the night that changed his life. Michael recounted waking up in excruciating pain, his vision impaired and his thoughts clouded by the trauma of the gunshot wound. He described the confusion and fear that enveloped him as he struggled to understand what had happened. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of his ordeal, leaving a profound impact on everyone present. Michael was adamant in his statements. He had not shot himself, nor had he ever harbored suicidal thoughts. His words were clear and unwavering, a direct challenge to the defense's narrative. The jury listened intently, their expressions a mix of empathy and concentration. Michael's testimony was supported by medical experts who detailed the severity of his injuries and the improbability of self-infliction given the trajectory of the bullet. The defense, led by a seasoned attorney, sought to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. They argued that the presence of gunshot residue on Michael's hands could not be ignored, suggesting that he might have been involved in the shooting. They pointed to the inconclusive results of certain forensic tests and questioned the reliability of the evidence presented. Their strategy was to create uncertainty, to challenge the notion that Sonia McKnight was the sole perpetrator. The prosecution, however, was prepared. Cumberland County District Attorney Sean McCormick delivered a compelling argument, emphasizing the actions and behaviors of Sonia in the aftermath of the shooting. He highlighted her attempts to wash her hands and dispose of clothing, actions that forensic experts testified could remove traces of gunshot residue. McCormick painted a picture of a calculated effort to obscure the truth, a narrative that resonated with the jury. The evidence presented during the trial was extensive and meticulously analyzed. Forensic scientists testified about the gunshot residue found on Sonia's hands and clothing, as well as the trajectory of the bullet that struck Michael. They explained how the residue patterns aligned with the prosecution's theory of events, providing a scientific basis for their claims. One of the most striking pieces of evidence was the testimony of first responders who arrived at the scene. They described finding Michael in a state of shock, his injury severe and his demeanor consistent with someone who had been attacked. Their observations were corroborated by police officers who noted the inconsistencies in Sonia's statements and her attempts to manipulate the narrative. The defense sought to counter this evidence by questioning its validity and presenting alternative interpretations. They argued that the residue on Michael's hands could have been transferred during the struggle or as a result of his proximity to the firearm. They also pointed to the inconclusive results of certain tests, suggesting that the evidence was not as definitive as the prosecution claimed. Despite these efforts, the prosecution's case remained strong. The combination of forensic analysis, eyewitness testimony, and expert opinions created a compelling narrative that was difficult to refute. The jury was presented with a detailed account of the events leading up to the shooting, each piece of evidence adding to the overall picture. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the trial reached its conclusion. The jury, composed of individuals from Delaware County to ensure impartiality, delivered their verdict on a sunny afternoon in late April. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood to announce the decision. Sonia McKnight was found guilty of attempted murder and aggravated assault. The verdict was a culmination of the evidence and arguments presented, a reflection of the jury's belief in the prosecution's case. Sonia's reaction was subdued, her expression a mix of resignation and disbelief. She remained composed as the judge read the sentencing guidelines, her demeanor a stark contrast to the gravity of the situation. Michael McCoy, seated in the gallery, listened intently as the verdict was delivered. For him, the trial was not just about justice but about closure, a chance to move forward from the trauma that had defined the past year of his life. His presence in the courtroom was a testament to his resilience, a reminder of the strength it takes to confront the past and seek accountability. The trial of Sonia McKnight was a moment of reckoning, a legal battle that exposed the complexities of human behavior and the consequences of unchecked emotions. It was a case that would be remembered not just for its outcome but for the questions it raised about trust, power, and the fragility of relationships. The events of that night left deep and lasting marks on the lives of all those involved. For Michael McCoy, the physical scars were the most apparent, a constant reminder of the night that nearly took his life. The loss of vision in his left eye transformed even the simplest daily tasks into challenges. While doctors and therapists helped him adapt to his new reality, the emotional toll was far heavier. Michael often reflected on the betrayal he felt, struggling to reconcile the actions of someone he had once trusted deeply. For months, he grappled with recurring nightmares, moments where the memory of the gunshot echoed in his mind, making peace feel elusive. Despite these struggles, Michael refused to let the trauma define him entirely. He found strength in the unwavering support of his family and close friends. His mother, a source of endless encouragement, stood by his side through hospital visits and courtroom proceedings. Michael began to channel his experience into advocacy, speaking publicly about overcoming adversity and shedding light on the importance of seeking help during emotional hardships. For him, survival was not just physical, it was a commitment to reclaiming the life he thought he had lost. For Sonia McKnight, the fall from grace was devastating. Once regarded as a symbol of fairness and authority, she became the subject of public condemnation. Her career, built on decades of dedication and ambition, was irreparably damaged. The courtroom that had once been her domain became a place of judgment against her. Her family, torn between loyalty and disbelief, struggled to come to terms with the actions that had led to her downfall. Sonia's parents, who had proudly celebrated her successes, now faced a reality that shattered their expectations. Her siblings, seeking clarity, vacillated between anger and grief. Within the community, the ripple effects of the crime were felt far and wide. The trust once placed in Sonia as a respected judge was replaced by skepticism and unease. Her peers, who had worked alongside her, were left questioning how someone in her position could commit such an act. For Michael's neighbors and colleagues, the ordeal highlighted the fragility of human relationships and the unpredictable nature of life. The incident reshaped the perceptions of everyone it touched, leaving them with questions that could not be easily answered. At its core, this tragic story underscored the devastating consequences of unresolved conflicts. The unraveling of Michael and Sonia's relationship, a bond that had once brought joy, revealed the complexities of emotions and the importance of communication. For Sonia, the inability to confront her feelings and seek healthy solutions led her down a path of irrevocable decisions. Her story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting resentment and despair take root. The case also shed light on the broader themes of power dynamics and accountability. Sonia's position as a judge, someone tasked with upholding justice, starkly contrasted with the crime she committed. It was a reminder that titles and status do not exempt anyone from the laws of morality and society. For the legal system, the trial emphasized the need for integrity and impartiality, serving as a testament to the importance of uncovering the truth, regardless of who stands accused. For Michael, the experience highlighted the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the trauma he endured, his determination to rebuild his life served as an inspiration to those around him. His journey became a testament to the value of perseverance and the profound impact of community support during times of hardship. Through his advocacy, he reminded others that strength can be found even in the darkest of moments. As the story of Michael McCoy and Sonia McKnight comes to an end, it leaves us with lingering reflections about the fragility of trust, the weight of choices, and the importance of compassion. Relationships, no matter how strong, require care and understanding to thrive. The absence of these can lead to fractures that grow deeper with time. The events of February 10, 2024, were a painful reminder of what can happen when emotions are left unchecked, when struggles are allowed to fester instead of being addressed. For everyone touched by this story, it was an opportunity to examine their own connections, to prioritize open dialogue and empathy. The tragedy was a lesson not just in justice, but in humanity, a call to cultivate kindness and understanding in every interaction. In the quiet moments after the verdict, as Michael McCoy walked away from the courthouse, there was no triumph or celebration, only the quiet resolve to move forward. For him, healing was a process, one that required patience and courage. For Sonia McKnight, the road ahead was marked by reflection and accountability, a chance to confront the choices that had led to her downfall. If you found this story compelling, consider exploring related videos on our channel. Dive into other true crime cases that examine the complexities of human behavior and the impact of societal pressures. From stories of resilience to cautionary tales, our channel is dedicated to bringing you thoughtful and engaging content. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the most disturbing true crime stories. I hope it has sparked reflection and dialogue, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you in the comments and future videos. To stay informed about more true crime stories like this one, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement keeps these stories alive. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story for sleep. May your dreams be peaceful, and your rest deep and rejuvenating. Good night.